everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Esther Archange, and I'm an academic trainer with the Center for Teaching and Learning. Today's session is titled The Dissertation Journey, A Healthy Mindset for Every Season with our very own NCU faculty member, Dr. Carrie Hall. Thank you for being with us here today, and we look forward to the information that you will pass on to our attendees. Just a reminder, I am recording this webinar and the video will be posted on the CTL LibGuides page within 24 hours. If you have questions throughout today's session, you can use the Q&A or chat feature located at the bottom of the Zoom window. We'll be answering questions towards the end, probably the 15 minutes towards the end of the presentation. With that, I will turn it over to Dr. Carrie Hall.
Thank you, Esther. So at this time, I would just like to welcome you to the presentation today or this evening, whichever time zone you are in. Just want to welcome you. So once again, I want to welcome you to the Dissertation Journey, a healthy mindset for every season. And I am Dr. Carrie Hall, a postdoctoral fellow here at NCU in the Department of Marriage and Family Therapy. I've been teaching several courses here at the university, and since graduating from NCU, one of the things I've wanted to do is to give back. So this webinar is an opportunity for me to share with you my experience as a doctoral student, with the hopes that I will share something that will be valuable for you along the way. I want you to keep in mind that this is only my experience, so it may not be relatable to you if you are already in the process of completing your dissertation or if you have already gone through the process. My dissertation was a qualitative dissertation, and it was titled Sarcoidosis, the Lived Experience of Patients and Their Families. For now, just to be brief, sarcoidosis is a chronic illness with no known cause or cure, and it's classified as a rare lung disease. So I will have a Q&A at the end, and if you want to ask any specific questions about the dissertation or the presentation, you can put that probably in Q&A. That would probably help. So let's step right in. Every part of the dissertation journey requires a different mindset. So sometimes when we get stuck in trying to do the next chapter the same way we did the last chapter, it can cause us to stagnate because the mindset has to shift to take the process to the next level. In addition to understanding the mindset, there are tips to exercising the brain to help the brain to function in the mindset for the season that you are in as you work towards your dissertation completion. I'm not a neurologist by any means. Let me just put that out there. So the tips that I will be sharing with you today are not evidence-based, medical, or scientific. Yet they are creative tips that I use to help me shift my way of thinking during times when I felt I was stuck and I needed fresh thought. I hope that what I share with you today, that it's going to be useful information. Also, to any fellow faculty that may be joining us today, maybe these tips can help some of your students to get unstuck. Let's get ready to take off. This presentation is divided into 6 sections. In the first 5 sections, I will be sharing with you each chapter of the dissertation that I completed, the necessary mindset that had to go into that chapter, a little bit about the process itself, and I will be comparing it to the seasons of life and then providing a healthy tip on how to navigate that season. So keep in mind, again, I will not be discussing a dissertation in detail, as there are already many webinars available through the Center of Teaching and Learning, or what we call the CTL, that can help answer those questions for you. Instead, I will be highlighting major parts of the dissertation that stuck out for me that are related to various types of thinking that would allow you to stretch your brain in a new direction. And every time there is a switch from one aspect of writing to another. As we know, there are many different writing styles, and as such, there are also patterns of thought that will help to train the brain to write in a style that matches that particular chapter of the dissertation. And so we will discuss from my personal perspective. And then finally, in section 6 is when I will open the floor for Q&A. Chapter 1 is the introduction to the dissertation. The main things that I heard when I was approaching my chapter 1 was gap in literature, problem statement, purpose of the study, and theoretical framework. So what does all this entail? The gap in literature was finding the gap. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. And you're looking for what other researchers before you indicated there needed to be more information about, or finding out what has not already been said that you can bring a voice to while you're building on prior research. With the problem statement, it's kind of, what is the problem you intend to study? The purpose statement, why are you choosing to study this topic? Who else cares about it? Why should other people care about it? And then a theoretical framework is the lens. What lens will you use to view your study? I consider chapter 1 to be spring. Things were bright, they were new, they were exciting. This was my first chapter. I was starting out on my dissertation journey. I was looking for the gap in literature because one unexpected thing happened. I started out with my own research topic that I had been writing on throughout the program. And then I was told by my committee that the topic did not seem to be research worthy. It had been done and overdone. So while I thought I was bringing something new, I had no literature to really prove it. So I had to go back to the drawing board, but because I didn't want to waste time, I had to do an immediate switch to a new topic, which is how I came up with sarcoidosis, because my topic had to be medical because I had a medical specialization. And it turns out that my husband has sarcoidosis, which is how I know of it. And so I asked him, was he willing to allow me to be a case study and us take this journey together? And he was excited about me doing the research because he was excited about things that I could learn that could potentially help him, which was also part of the process. And I may talk more about that later. But basically, the committee also had concerns. Once I got to sarcoidosis, then the concern was, is she going to be able to successfully complete this study because the information was so limited? So I had to convince my committee that even with the limited information, I'm going to look up what I can find. And that is how I discovered the gap in literature. I was able to develop my problem statement and my purpose statement because the biggest gap was that there was limited information. There was not much known about sarcoidosis from the marriage and family therapy perspective. So once you do that, once you find that gap, that's going to help you develop your problem and your purpose statement. You'll start to conceptualize or explain your theoretical framework. And all of this requires a critical thinking mindset. So it's important to make sure that the problem is research worthy. You want to be able to draw the reader. You want your writing to be concise. And in a nutshell, the critical thinking is how I was able to make sense of what I read and what I gathered. I know during this point, you probably expected me, when we think about healthy tips, to talk about eating, sleeping, and exercising. Those are healthy tips that I will discuss much later. But for now, let's discuss some other tips that may stimulate your brain to think critically. It's important during this time to read, read, read. The more you read, the more your brain is being stretched and you are getting your mind sharp enough to evaluate research articles more closely. And when I'm saying read, 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 you can read Cat in the Hat and read, read, read. I personally have a lot of Dr. Seuss collection. I really think he can be very profound. So it doesn't really matter what you're reading per se, just doing the exercise of consistent, constant, daily reading is helping that brain to be stimulated to think critically. As you read, you want to take notes and brainstorm what you think about these topics and why. Remember, you are looking for your gap in literature, and you're also trying to bring out why your topic is unique, and what you are doing is how it's going to bring, what is it going to bring to the table that is new and refreshing, and it also has to enhance your discipline. So don't overlook the small things. I have small children, so playing games and spending time with them was accomplishing more than one goal at a time. The puzzles and the guessing games, they help you to stay in the realm of problem solving. So this is going to help you when you are trying to develop your problem statement. Now we're heading out to the deep. Chapter 2. This was my literature review. So the literature review caused me to shift from critical thinking to abstract thinking and generalizations. In a literature review, I was researching my theoretical framework, which again is basically what lens will you view your study or model. So for example, I used the family systems illness model and the model of ambiguous loss because I was doing a qualitative study with a medical specialization. My theoretical framework was an integrated model of the two. So the theoretical framework in this chapter, I want to emphasize in chapter 2, it's different than in chapter 1. In chapter 1, you are simply mentioning the framework. But in chapter 2, you are describing the framework, you're explaining the framework, and you're explaining how you are going to incorporate this framework into your study. So what I had to do was I had to look for seminal works, I had to look for current works, and then I had to make a bridge between the two. Chapter 2 to me was like summer. Everything is open. There's lots to explore. So the abstract thinking, excuse me, is when you are thinking broadly and openly. Abstract, we often think about art, colorful and artistic. Well, thinking of the literature in a way that all of the pieces to a puzzle are going to fit together. So imagine a tapestry or a quilt. There's a pattern to what you are doing in a literature review about how each artist or dissertation candidate goes about putting together that work of art. That part is unique. How you decide to put it together is your own unique personality. I use more than one method to accomplish this task. So that's where generalizing came in, because that was my starting point. It was the place where I took the concepts that I found and I put them all together. In essence, I was synthesizing. So sometimes we hear about synthesizing and some people aren't clear. That's it in a nutshell. I took notes on the articles that I was reading, and then I got a presentation board and I cut and pasted my quotes underneath some brainstorming questions that I had. And as I began to see what topic they fit under, I had a visual of my project coming together. So during this part of the process, my brain was operating at full capacity because I needed all of the brain power that I could muster to review both seminal and recent works and everything in between. And I used these skills to provide a well-rounded backdrop for my study. During this time, it's important that you take frequent breaks and walk away to do other things that are keeping your mind open to creativity. It may seem odd and as if you are wasting time, but the one thing I learned from my chair is that your brain is working on the dissertation when you are doing other things. I spent time lounging on the couch, eating snacks, watching comedy shows. I love to laugh, so that's what I was doing. And I was often drifting off to sleep and then waking up and realizing that, oh my gosh, I'm out of time. I have to go and pick up my children from school. And then I would come back home and guilt would set in. And I would start thinking, oh no, I just wasted time. But in reality, I was not wasting time. I was recharging my brain. So my SME also encouraged me to walk away and go outside and just throw a ball in the air. I had to realize that these people, my committee members, with much more experience than I had, they seemed to be so relaxed about me not spending every waking moment on the dissertation. And I'm sitting here going, how could they trust me this way? And what I didn't know then, I later learned. Over time, what I realized is that these moments when you're doing something else, you are refreshing your mind so that when you go back to the academic literature, I noticed that I was thinking more clearly. I was able to start making connections and associations to help the chapter come together. And I was actually moving much more quickly than when I tried to just kind of stay at it and stay at it. Chapter 3 is a detailed chapter. So there is a lot that goes into chapter 3. Let me just say it that way. This is another area where we could basically spend a whole hour just discussing all of the areas that go into this chapter and the IRB process. However, this is not that webinar, so I'm just going to hit the highlights. For the methodology, you basically describe why the method you chose is most suited for your study, and you're going to have that appropriate literature to back that up. My research method, it was a phenomenological study, and I only came to this by researching alternative methods. So it was something about phenomenology that resonated with me, and I knew that it was a good fit after I started researching other types. For those that aren't familiar with it, phenomenology is about trying to capture the essence of an experience. So you cast aside preconceived notions and you want to uncover the meaning. So the descriptive, because there are different types of phenomenology, but I use descriptive phenomenological method, and it had steps that I could follow to do my research. And this was a good fit for me because I'm definitely a believer in taking steps. And grounded theory, it's close to phenomenology, but the difference is that the grounded theory is trying to discover a new theory. So this did not work for my study because I did not know what the experience of the patients and their families living with sarcoidosis was. So, that may be a good follow-up, but it wasn't a good initial. So finding that good fit for you for your research methods and your methodology is very important, because the other fit that worked for me is that I was the primary instrument for my study. What better instrument than me? I thought this was great. So with data analysis, in this chapter, you're going to explain how I plan to analyze the data. So again, because I was using a method by Georgie called the descriptive phenomenological method, that gave me my steps, which that way I knew exactly what steps I had to do to analyze my data. Assumptions, or what do you think is going to happen? What do you think are the possibilities, the limitations? When you talk about limitations, what do you think the potential weaknesses of your study will be? And what steps do you plan to take to mitigate those limitations? And then the delimitations is about boundaries. What boundaries are you going to put around your study? Basically, how are you going to narrow that scope? For instance, I wanted to interview people who had sarcoidosis for at least 1 year, because I did not think that someone just finding out that they had it would be able to provide the information that I was seeking. Not to mention, sarcoidosis is an illness that it can come mysteriously, and it can also go mysteriously. So, there's different time frames of people living with sarcoidosis. So I wanted to make sure that if you've been living with it for at least a year, then that's telling me that you definitely have an experience with it. And so that's kind of what I wanted to do. Ethical assurances. That's about protecting confidentiality, informed consent, those types of things. So as you can see, chapter 3 is a place where it can be so easy to get stuck, because the thought process has to switch from broad to detailed and precise. So just remember, you were just in your literature review and you just had this creative, this broad, mindset that you had to do because you had to research all of these articles, and then boom, you're in chapter 3 and it is very methodical. So you went from broad thinking to having to make sense of everything. And so this is another reason why sometimes people get stuck, because it's like I haven't been able to draw my mind in. So I call this season the fall or the autumn season. Think about how the leaves are falling off the trees, and of course, this is to be expected. So although no two leaves look alike, I also want to let you know no two research projects look alike. Don't spend time comparing your dissertation journey and process to somebody else's, even when you're duplicating prior research. Because remember what I was saying earlier, you are the primary instrument. So you are the one element that will change the whole thing. The research methods chapter, it really does, I can't emphasize that enough. It needs to be detailed, explain every step of your process with precision. There's no room for error, because the IRB is going to have set expectations for you and what you're doing. It has to be detailed and exact, and you're going to be expected to describe it. You're going to be expected to follow through with it. And when you go back to the IRB to close out your study, you want to make sure that, all that you initially planned to do, happen. If it didn't happen, you're going to need to be able to justify that. So healthy tips for precision. You see the steps? Like I said, I like taking steps. I believe in steps in order. So while it may be silly to do these things that I'm suggesting here, just as we discussed on the last 2 healthy tips, following steps and directions, they're setting your mind up to think in a sequential, logical order, so that when you go back to the dissertation, your mind is already focused on moving in this manner. So if you take the time to make a dish with the loved one, and we like to, when we're cooking, I don't know about you, but my daughter and I love to cook together, and we want to throw in our different we're like, the recipe look good, but I need to throw in my own stuff. This is not the time for that. This is the time to be exact. So do a recipe and make up your mind. You're going to follow the directions exactly, no additives. Walk around and count stairs or steps as you walk. Don't use the pedometer. I know we have pedometers and apps and all these different things. And I'm not saying count your 10 or 20,000 steps, for the whole day. Not saying that, but just start to be mindful of, if you take a flight of stairs, are there 13 flights in this stairs? Let me count 1, 2, 3, 4. And you're training your brain to start thinking about steps in order, so that when you start writing, you're following the steps and the order, and your brain is going to be doing it without you having to struggle so much to make that happen. At least I hope that, like I said, works for you. Again, these are my tips. Chapter 4. Okay, this for me was a roller coaster, to say the least. It just really was. I had to figure out the best way to report my findings, and this was challenging. I had completed chapter 3. I went through the IRB process pretty smoothly. I think they sent back like one time for 1 or 2 little small changes that had to be made. I did it pretty quickly, sent it back, and I was sent on my way to start my study. So for me, I did not have the IRB horrors and nightmares that I hear about. But again, I was so focused in my brain on that steps and that order. It has to be in order. It has to be steps. What did IRB say? Let me read this. Let me read it again. Okay. I was really working on that precision. So that is the way my thought process was running. But when I got to chapter 4, it was it was a little bit different because after doing the study, now I have to sit with the data. I have to organize all of this information, and it was just challenging for me. It was personal. Like I said, my husband had been diagnosed with sarcoidosis, and so the different things that I heard from the participants were some things I could relate to, and some things, I was going, wow, I can't believe you had this experience, or it's just all of these things that were kind of going into it. And at this point, my husband and I have been living with it for probably about 3 years when I started the dissertation, and probably 4 years at the point where I was having to kind of look at all this information for chapter 4. So basically, I oh my gosh, I learned a wealth of information. I really did, from the participants, and I had to try to separate, because again, the phenomenological process, looking for that meaning, finding the essence of what the participants are saying. I had to separate my experience from the experience of the participants. And I had to now find a way to present all of the different experiences as well as the similar experiences of the participants in an organized way. I had to switch from thinking very methodically and logically to thinking creatively. And so here I am again, stretching my brain from one direction to the next. Now, if anybody's wondering, now hopefully at this point in this presentation, you're getting an idea of why the dissertation drives people crazy, because your mind is going from one direction to the next based on the chapters that you are working on and the information that you're having to put into each of those chapters. And sometimes it can be two totally different extremes. So this was a challenge. I felt like I was going down a steep hill at a pretty fast pace. I mean, my dissertation chair, he had a background in art, and he was trying to use this skill to help me think creatively. And I was so flustered. I didn't even know some of the art terms he was using. And I was like, I don't understand. I don't know what this word is. And so he's like, oh, I'm sorry, I have a background in art. And so then I was like, well, I actually looked it up, and I just hope I'm understanding this the right way. I mean, this is how challenging this was. We got to a point where he was trying everything he could to bring this creativity out of me. And we got to a point where he said, why don't you just argue with me? Feel free to argue back, just go ahead. And I said, no, I don't think that's going to be a good idea, because both our names are going on this project, and I think that we both should be happy with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the drawing board, and I'm going to find a way to kind of break through this and come up with something that we both can be pleased with. And I'm not really sure, why I couldn't make those connections. I'm not sure if I was just mentally exhausted. I really don't recall what that block was that I just couldn't make the connections. But I do remember that my SME has said to me, he said, Carrie, you can be, and if you haven't heard anything else I've said today, grab this one line. You can be in your most optimal shape and you will still hit a wall. Everything that I'm telling you today, you can look at it and say, oh, that's not helpful. Or you can look at it and say, oh, maybe I can do this or that. Even if you were to try to do every single thing that's in this presentation, it doesn't matter. The wall is there and it's just a part of the process. And once he said that to me, you'll be very clear when you hit that wall, by the way, no matter what chapter it's in. I think people hit them at different spots. No matter where that wall is for you, trust me, you'll know when you when you hit it. And for those who have already gone before me, I know I can't see anybody's faces, but I kind of believe that at this point, there's a bunch of people out there shaking heads going, yeah, been there, done that. Remember that moment when I just, hit that wall and thought, man, I'm done. I'm fried. I'm not gonna make it to the end of this thing. But there's some more fight in you. And that's why we're here today. At least that's why I'm here today, because I want to bring out that fight in you and just remind you that you can get through this process and figure out that, some things may sound crazy, but here's another thing. This is why I'm focusing on, what this process is and how your brain has to shift. I've got to say it. You have to think about what you're thinking about. And so I know this sounds strange, but it's true. You have to think about what you're thinking about. So this was a critical stage in my journey. So this was the time when I needed to be eating right, sleeping well, exercising, but guess what? I wasn't. You ever heard the saying, those who can't do teach? Well, this is one of those moments. I was getting about 3 hours of sleep per night. I was skipping meals, forgetting to drink water, not walking in the mornings the way I had been doing. To make a long story short, the other reason I'm so glad to be here with you today is I had a stroke. I had a TIA, which is known as a transient ischemic attack. It's like a mini stroke. And it was a wake-up call to me that no dissertation was worth my life. I had to take care of myself. So thankfully, I am here today to encourage you to please take care of yourself. And believe me, I drink water. I make sure I get my sleep. I, walk my dog. I do things now that that I took for granted. I will say when I was trying to get through the dissertation, because I thought press was the way to go. And I'm just here to encourage you. That is not the way to go. So when you do these basics, we hear about these things so often. And that's why, like I said, I didn't want the whole presentation to be about eating and, because we know these things, but there is a place where it belongs. And that place is right here. That when you do the basics, it's going to provide you with the best brain power. You really aren't doing your best work when you're exhausted and you're hangry, hangry, hungry, and angry, but you're angry because you're the only person that stopped yourself from eating, and it's just kind of like, you are the one that needs to eat healthy. Why are you so hangry? So it was these things that I was going through. And so I can't remember when chapter 4 finally came together for me, but one day it just clicked. I figured out how I wanted to present the information, and my chair was pleased. He brought something out of me that I did not know was there. And I can tell you, I thank my chair to this day, because chapter 4 of my dissertation is my favorite chapter. And to this day, I still can't believe that I wrote it. It is so amazing to me. So moving right along, we're coming up to our last chapter here and to our close where we can start taking Q&A. The same as chapter 3. So chapter 5 is kind of similar to chapter 3, where there are many pieces that are going to go into this chapter. You are basically tying everything together from the previous 4 chapters, and much of what you see in the bullet points that I've outlined for you, they've already been discussed. And so in chapter 5, you're really just restating this information, but you're stating it in a shorter phrase and a shorter amount of pages. 2 points that you are adding that was not discussed earlier that's going to come into chapter 5 is your recommendations for practice, which is basically, what do you recommend that other practitioners do now that they have the information you presented? And then the recommendations for future research, what did your study reveal or possibly lack that another researcher can build upon? Again, this is going to be the gap in literature for somebody else, or even possibly yourself if you decide to do a follow-up postdoctoral study. So this season I call due season because it's about harvesting. So some people know this quote from church, other people know it from farming, and maybe there's somebody who never heard it before. But I chose the quote from my youngest daughter's Bible because it said it the best and it put it in the most simplest terms. Basically, the dissertation is like anything else you do in life. What you plant is bound to come up. Eventually, all the hard work and energy that went into the project, it just came together for a complete manuscript. What you put into the dissertation is going to reveal itself. I did all of my own work. I did not have researchers, editors, transcribers, or anybody else to analyze my work for me. I felt like I needed to do it myself. I did have a librarian that offered to research and do editing services. And when I saw how much that I would have to pay to have somebody transcribe my interviews, and when I started thinking about all those things, I did consider at one point a transcription service because I was kind of thinking like, oh, this is a lot. But then I decided, no, I don't want anyone's help, not being stubborn, but just that I wanted to do it myself because the transcriber and the librarian, they were not going to defend my dissertation for me. I was going to defend my dissertation. So I wanted to know it like the back of my hand. I wanted to know that every piece of that blood, sweat, and tears was mine. And it was. And also my chair must be my academic reader. Let me not take their credit away. So, they had blood, sweat, and tears in there as well. So, and I appreciate that. So all of that went into it, basically was myself and my committee. I'm not against anybody else that needs the help, uses the help, or anything like that. Believe me, I'm not putting that process down. Everybody's journey is different. I'm just sharing with you my journey and why it was so important for me to be hands-on, because I had to be with that data, and I had to really know that study. I had to think holistically. So this was my time to take all of the parts from beginning to end, put them together in one chapter to explain my studies and findings, and summarize the entire process and project. So this was it's a time to be reflective. You want to look back, see all that you've accomplished. At the same time, it's a time to look forward, because completing the dissertation is not the final milestone. The final milestone is the defense. And that's where it comes in, where I said I wanted to be hands-on from beginning to end. Because one thing about me, if I mess up, I at least know where I messed up. If somebody else messes up for me, well, I may not be able to fix that. But if I messed up, I can fix my own mistakes. So I wanted to be hands-on with my dissertation, beginning to end, so that I could defend it, because I have heard horror stories, once again, about those that write these fantastic manuscripts, but when it comes to the defense, they cannot make it through on the first try. I did not want that experience. I wanted the first try, and thank God that's what I had, where I was able to successfully defend it. And I felt like my bottom was glued to my chair for, I don't know how long I sat in that chair when it was all said and done, and I realized that they were calling me doctor. So it's really important to start thinking about how you're going to take all that you've written and be able to explain that work to other people as well. So to summarize, basically in this webinar, what I attempted to do was discuss with you the chapters of the qualitative dissertation that I completed. Again, like I said, it was personal, so that I completed, and basically comparing it to a season of life, suggesting a type of mindset that will likely strengthen your focus, as well as practical tips to help you to increase that brain power that's needed for the mindset that is identified for that particular chapter or part of the process. And I do hope that you have learned something that can help you keep a healthy balance along your dissertation journey. And also that when you get stuck, that you're able to do a self-check on potentially how are you thinking about that chapter, and perhaps use some of the healthy tips that I provided to recharge and just strengthen your mindset so that you can overcome the challenges within each part of this process. All right, let's discuss Q&A.
Before we get to the Q&A, I'd like to thank you, first of all, for sharing your experiences. Again, in the chat, we were all saying we're glad that you're healthy and here with us today after your experiences. And so thank you for sharing that information with us. So we do have a good amount of questions in the Q&A. We have about 85 attendees in here today, so we have quite the group. So we're going to try our best to get through as many questions as we can. And if we can't get to the questions, we'll share Dr. Hall's information towards the end so you all can reach out to her individually. All right, so let's go ahead and start. Let's see, we have a question here. We have one question that basically asked, were you able to work while you were doing your dissertation?
Actually, yes. So I was in private practice doing high conflict parenting of all things. I'm the owner, and I did have a co-facilitator for the psychoeducational courses that I provided. I was doing Christian counseling with individuals, families, and couples. I had two young daughters. I think my youngest was in elementary at the time, and my oldest was in middle school at the time of my dissertation. And so and like I said, I have a husband, so I had a household to run. I had children to take care of. I had the job that I had to do. And like I said, when you're an entrepreneur and it's your business, there's no turning that off. That's full time. And I had to focus on the dissertation.
That sounds like quite the load to carry throughout the dissertation process. I'm sure a lot of other people may be able to relate to that as well. Yeah. Let's see. Our next question from Angelia. How were you able to minimize your biases due to your familial experience with the condition?
And so that's what I was saying, really made it challenging in chapter 4, where I had to sit with the data and I had to just say, okay, what did the participants say? So I had recorded the interviews to be able to go back to transcribe. So there was hours spent listening, rewinding, typing. And like I said, that when I looked into transcription services, there were services that said, oh, we can have this, back to you in a week's time. And I'm thinking that would be great. But it probably took me longer than a week to type up, those interviews and word for word, everything every participant said, but it was so worth it.
Awesome. This question from Lorene connects with the previous question, balancing work and school. If you had a full-time job, did you have to take a leave of absence, or were you able to push through both?
Well, I'll go ahead and answer it, because even though it's similar, one of the things that I did appreciate was being in practice for myself, because I was able to balance my schedule and set my hours and also have the flexibility for my children. So that was the one thing. And that's why I put that in there as far as playing games, doing puzzles, being with your children, going to the park. I didn't miss any. My oldest is very athletic. I don't know of too many sports she hasn't played. And I was on the soccer field on Friday nights when I needed to be. I was in the basketball stands when I needed to be. I was at the band concerts because she was in band, much like her mom, when I needed to be. And my youngest was competitive in gymnastics, and I was at gymnastics competitions, and she was doing gymnastics for, they conditioned for 12 hours a week, and I was sitting there 3 hours sometimes with my laptop and trying to do things that a lot of times I'm looking at her. And so but I balanced as best I could. I did not miss anything for my children for my dissertation. They come first.
I forgot to mention this too. I wanted to, I'm going to keep dropping it in the chat. NTU does have a dissertation center that breaks down the chapters and answers a lot of questions. There's other webinars related to
Right.
dissertations as well. I do want you all to take advantage of that. There's a lot of resources available to you all. I'll probably end up sending that in the email if you registered to this presentation. We'll get back to the Q&A. Let's see. Do you think burnout in the medical community would be too broad of a subject? Should I narrow it?
Burnout in the medical community, I think that is broad. Because that could mean a lot of things. So, because the medical community itself is broad. So, I would narrow it. I would think about a population in the medical community. There's a difference between burnout in hospice versus burnout in EMS, or burnout in a hospital, or burnout in urgent care. There are so many different, what about family practice, family practitioners versus, dental hygienists. I mean, there's the medical. When you say medical, it's too broad. So I would narrow it.
Awesome. We have a question from Jennifer. One question I have is, how many 8-week supplements did you do during your dissertation? And how did you handle emotions relating to needing more time?
I'm trying to think, because it was some, I think it might have been one in chapter 1, because like I said, I had to come up with a new topic, and then so it kind of took me a little bit with that gap and that problem and that purpose. And then chapter 2, finding literature, what I had to do, I know I extended time in chapter 2 because I had to find out other illnesses. I had to research like cancer and stroke and different type of illnesses to fill that, because there wasn't a lot of literature on sarcoidosis. So in order to get what I needed, I had to compare it to other illnesses, and I had to make sure, are these illnesses also matching and making sense? So that was a big task to do. As far as chapter 3 went, like I said, that was smooth for me. That was quick. That wasn't a whole lot of time extension. I think if I had one, it was probably because of the IRB and not me. Because that, like I said, I was kind of on that. The steps and the detail was important to me. Chapter 4, like I said, was tough. And chapter 5, it was a breeze. I don't recall extending that. In chapter 4, again, that's when I had the stroke as well. So I definitely had slowed down at that point. As far as the mindset of, I need more time, the very first time I panicked. In chapter 1, I panicked because I started comparing myself to what other people were saying in the comments. And this person is rolling along, and this person is rolling along. And then I finally started realizing, and my chair was talking to me about it, and he was very comforting. You cannot compare yourself to anybody else. Everybody has their own journey, and people don't have what you have. And I had to think about it, and I said, you know what? One of the main persons I was looking at, he finished his whole thing in like 7 months. And here I had been comparing myself to him, probably took me like a year and a half to finish mine. But I was comparing myself to him, and then I realized he got onto the comments and said he had no family, he had no job,
Oh, wow.
he didn't have all these things. And I thought about it like, well, if I had no family and no job and all I had to do was my dissertation, I probably could have been done in 7 months too. So you really can't compare your journey to anybody else's, because everybody's doing a different study. People are using different methods. People have different resources. You have different abilities and time constraints that are different. Do you? Do you? Yes.
Excellent point there. Our next question from Warren. I heard the healthy tips given and was wondering, did these actually help you um, with your dissertation process, or was it afterwards that you realized things that would have been beneficial?
Actually, no, these are things that helped. And because they helped, so I guess I should tell you the backstory to this presentation. I was, wanted to do a CTO webinar to give back. I had all these different topics, and I started talking to Emily Springer. Some of you are familiar with her in the CTL. And as I'm talking to Emily, she's like, "Oh, I'm so curious about your dissertation." And we start talking about, she said, you have wonderful topics, and it's not that I don't want to talk about those. She said, but I'm much more interested in your journey. She said, people need to hear this. Like, you really need to share this. And I said, okay. So that's really how it came to be. So putting the presentation together was putting together, like I said, those things that I did use and do to get through every part of that the different mindsets. The part that came later with the presentation was not realizing, that it was critical thinking, or that it was holistic, or that it was creative. That's the only part that I had to, kind of look back to put into it. But it's what I did. It's what I did. It helped.
Awesome. I'm really quickly to everyone, I'm dropping the NCU Dissertation Center website in the chat. And again, I'm going to email that to you. So if you have questions about specific chapters that we don't get a chance to go through, those websites have handouts, videos, a lot of different things that can break this down for you. Our next question, in transcribing, did you listen and literally type the interviews, or did you use the transcription
No,
portion?
I did not. Well, I have background as administrative assistant
Oh,
for medical practitioners. So, and it was emergency medicine. So, because I had that, that was like my little first job from undergrad, when you can't find your your first job, and so you end up doing something in between. And so I worked at a hospital. I had 7 physicians that I worked for as an administrative assistant. And so, because of that experience, I was used to listening and transcribing. So, I listened and transcribed as I listened.
awesome. So you already had that experience there.
Yeah.
Uh, let's see. What were the places that you wrote more? Was it in the library? Did you have like a space?
I had my favorite space is actually where I am right now. I happen to be in my home office. That was my favorite space to write. Because I could close the door. My family knew that I was going into my zone, and so it was just, quiet, and just, off limits to other people, except for the North Central that you see behind me is actually a North Central throw blanket that's over a couch that my husband would sleep on when I was up late. doing things. But and my children, of course, will pop in from time to time. But my home office was my favorite space because it was just that quiet space. And like I said, there were those times that I did go to the library. I love the library. I still go to the library to write. I used to go to the library literally every day of the week when I was in undergrad, which is how I developed that habit of the library. So I do still like the library. And then, like I said, I tried to take it to never to a soccer game, but just to when my daughter was doing gymnastics. I tried to take it when she was conditioning, but it never worked because I couldn't focus on what I was doing because I was always watching her. So I kind of even stopped at some point because I said, you know what, sitting here for 3 hours watching her, that's what I mean about taking time away from it. But then you're feeling guilty thinking, am I supposed to be writing? And later realizing, no, I feel much more refreshed that I just spent 3 hours watching my daughter condition and see all the new skills that she's accomplished and what she's doing and how she's growing. Um, you know, was refreshing my brain.
Right. You still found a way to be present, even though you
Yes.
have your dissertation.
Yes.
Um, we'll take, again, we didn't get a chance to go through all the questions, but I'll take this last question before we close the Q&A portion. Um, the last question I'm going to ask today is this is from Tammy. I'm working on chapter 1 now, but I'm afraid as I go along, I will find that my theoretical framework won't apply or I just don't have enough information. Do you have any advice for me? I feel like I want to quit sometimes.
Oh, well, feeling like you want to quit, that's going to be a part of the process again along the way. Don't quit, Tammy. It's so well worth it. I will say that. So keep going. And if you don't feel like the theoretical framework is working, that's what I mean. It sounds weird to say, but think about what you're thinking about. How are you thinking about that theoretical framework? Have you decided to how are you're not trying to you shouldn't try you're not this is not a situation where you're trying to um squeeze something together that just doesn't fit. What you're looking for with your framework is what is just going to naturally click together nicely for you. And so if what you're working on, if it's not clicking, then maybe look around and try to see, is there something else that works? I stumbled across the family systems illness model. I started out with ambiguous loss being my only theoretical framework. And then as I started researching, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. The family systems illness model. And as I started reading more, I'm going, oh my gosh, oh my goodness, this is just like a perfect, fit. It just came together. And that's where I ended up integrating the two models because they just fit together so nicely. So give it some time. You'll get through it, Tammy. And I guess I guess I should do that. Here's my contact information. If anybody has any questions or anything would like to contact me, feel free.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that information. Just some encouraging words to our folks out there that are wanting to do the dissertation or in the process. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. Again, we have lots of resources available to you at NCU. I will be sending an email with the links for the videos and NCU resources that you can utilize to help you along the way. Dr. Hall has her information as well, so if you'd like to reach out to her, you can have that information as well. So with that, I'd like to again thank you so much to Dr. Carrie Hall for taking the time out to present and giving her experience in providing this amazing information to our attendees. I also want to take the time out to thank our attendees for joining us today and contributing to the conversations and asking questions. As a reminder, the recording will be posted on the CTL LibGuides page along with our YouTube page. Make sure you like and subscribe to our CTL YouTube page. I will send you those links. And that should be up within the next 24 hours. Again, thank you all. Dr. Hall, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome presentation there. Singing your praises in the chat, by the way.
Okay.
Just so you know, all right?
Okay.
All right. Have a good evening, everyone.